talk to you guys about a question that people ask me a lot as a Spanish teacher who learned Spanish. I get asked the question, how long did it take you to learn Spanish? Or, will I be fluent after this year? So let me just tell you about the process for me of learning Spanish. I can't tell you how long it's going to take you to learn. It's different for everybody, and I think I'll get into that a little bit as I tell my story. I began to learn Spanish when I was about 11 years old in middle school. I took Spanish in 7th and 8th grade, and then I took it all through high school. And I would say during that time, all of those 6 years, I really enjoyed Spanish as an academic subject to study. I really enjoyed school, so I saw Spanish very similar to the way I saw English or social studies or science class. It was just a class. And I applied myself to learn it to get a grade, but it wasn't quite so much about actually communicating with anybody. I was doing it more because I had homework and I needed to get my homework done. I saw it as a very academic exercise, not the way I see it today. During this time of learning Spanish academically from age 11 to age 18, I developed the skills of reading. I got to the point that I could read fairly well in Spanish. Also, writing came early. During those first 6 years or so, I felt confident with my Spanish writing, but speaking and listening was very difficult. I did not have any confidence to speak Spanish to native Spanish speakers. I would speak Spanish sometimes jokingly with other friends who were in Spanish classes, but I did not feel confident to speak it with anyone who was a native Spanish speaker. I didn't feel that I would be understood. I didn't feel that I would be able to understand them. I remember being out and about with family, and we would hear Spanish being spoken around us, and my parents would nudge me and say, "Hannah, what are they saying?" And I couldn't keep up with the speed. Maybe I could pick out 1 or 2 words, but I didn't know what people were saying. Or we would go to like a Mexican restaurant and people would tell me to order in Spanish, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to speak Spanish. I didn't want anyone to feel like I was trying to speak Spanish because I assumed they couldn't speak Spanish. I didn't want to offend anybody. And I didn't feel that my spoken Spanish was good enough at all to communicate. When I got to college, I knew that I wanted to study to be a teacher, and I thought I wanted to be a math teacher, but I continued to study Spanish as well because I was starting to begin to want to be able to actually be fluent and have a conversation. I didn't necessarily think I would ever teach Spanish, but I wanted to be able to communicate better. It had gone from, instead of being more of an academic exercise, to, wow, people speak this language, I would like to be able to have a conversation with them after having studied Spanish for 6 years at this point. So during college, at one point I ended up being friends with some people who were from different countries who spoke Spanish natively. And so when I was with them, we would speak Spanish because that was the language that they would speak when they were hanging out. So as the more time I spent with these friends of mine, I would speak Spanish whenever I was with them, and it really started to raise my confidence. I think it truly did improve my Spanish because it forced me, instead of being in a classroom environment where I could kind of filter through what I was thinking, practice it in my head, and then try to speak perfectly, I suddenly was in a situation where I'm just having a conversation with a friend. I knew that friend cared for me and wasn't going to judge me if I said something wrong, so I felt free to just kind of blurt stuff out without having to fix my grammar and my pronunciation perfectly in my head before speaking. So the more I spoke with these friends, the more my confidence grew because I realized, wow, I understand what they're saying. And I think they understand me because they're talking back and it makes sense. So I was super encouraged by the fact that communication was happening and that I was able to understand my friends for the most part. There were always little hiccups where I didn't quite catch something. And I'm sure there were times that I said things that didn't make sense quite right, but they knew what I was trying to say. And communication was fairly effective. So that really helped me to see Spanish less as an academic subject and more as a way to communicate with people that I really care about. So in that experience, both my confidence increased, but also my actual ability increased because I was using it constantly. At the end of college, I spent 4 months in Peru, in Arequipa, Peru, studying. For my college, in order to get a degree in Spanish, you had to study abroad for 1 semester. So I did that. I lived with a family that didn't really speak much English and went to classes at a Peruvian university, spent time with people speaking Spanish. Spanish was my main language for 4 months there. And again, I know that I made a ton of mistakes, but the people around me were very gracious, taught me, listened to me, helped me, and that experience is what gave me further confidence to think, wow, not only do I feel that I can carry on a conversation in Spanish anytime I want to, I really want to teach people this language instead of teaching math. So that's what brought me to become a Spanish speaker and Spanish learner and Spanish teacher. So if we think back, I started when I was 11. From 11 to 18, it was very academic. From about 18 to 22, it was more of Spanish came to life a little bit more, and I was able to use it, immerse myself in it. I immersed myself in it in Peru, but also here in the United States with my Spanish-speaking friends. So I share that story in order to point out a few things. First, it took me a really long time to learn Spanish. From age 11 to age 22, when I graduated from college and was like, wow, I can speak Spanish and teach this finally. I didn't really start considering myself to be fluent in Spanish until that point, when I realized that, wow, I can have a conversation with anybody at any point in time in Spanish. For me, that took about 11 years. I think part of that is because for the first 6 years, I didn't even see Spanish as a skill. I saw it as an academic course. So I do think that it's possible to learn Spanish much quicker than I did, because for such a long time in there, I didn't see it as something that I wanted to pursue in that way. It was more just something that I'm kind of good at, a class that I'm taking. I do think that the immersion in Spanish helps a ton. And you don't have to go to a different country to immerse yourself in Spanish. There's people in our communities who speak Spanish, and sitting around with them a couple times a week, just asking if you can practice. That's one way to do a kind of minor immersion experience. There's all sorts of places in our communities where you can go to hear Spanish being spoken. There's podcasts, there's videos, there's TV programs, there's entire TV channels, radio programs, all of it's in Spanish. So if you want to create more immersive environment for yourself, that's definitely possible for you to do here in the United States. Another thing is that during all of my personal Spanish speaking or Spanish learning process, until college, I never really sat down and was like, okay, I want to learn how to talk about this. I want to get better at this. I was just doing homework. I studied outside of class when I had homework to do, but it was never something that connected with my own heart or with my desires. It was just that I was doing work for a grade. So if this is something that you really want on a deeper level, you might be able to achieve it faster than the 11 years that it took me. Because for the first 6 years of that, I was just kind of floating through it, doing homework because I wanted to get an A. You definitely do not have to wait until you're fluent in Spanish to be speaking Spanish. You'll actually get fluent faster if you're practicing all along the way. Like I said, there's people, I'm happy to be speaking Spanish with you, but I know there's so many people who are also native speakers who might be willing to listen to you and talk with you and let you practice with them. So don't wait until you're fluent to start speaking Spanish, or any language for that matter. Thanks for listening to my story about how I have learned Spanish and how that process has gone for me. You have your own story about how you learned Spanish or how you're learning Spanish, so that's cool. Tell your story.